was about to say good morning. Well, good morning. Good evening, everybody. So used to saying good morning. Good evening, everybody. And can I welcome you to the 6th meeting in 2014 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. The committee welcomes the opportunity to meet in Dumbarton as part of Parliament Day, and we appreciate the hospitality of everyone who has supported us in meeting here in the Borough Hall. We've had a really positive day where we've discussed housing issues informally with local tenants and housing associations, and we look forward to hearing the issues raised during this formal session tonight, when we will hear from groups who represent tenants from across Scotland. Can I thank all of you here as members of the public for taking the time to come along tonight. We have set aside some time at the end of the meeting for a Q&A session to allow you the opportunity to ask questions. I notice in the audience some people who have already met with us this morning, but I'm sure there'll be more questions this evening. If you have a question during the session that you'd like us to address at the end, can you please use the paper and pens to jot down your question and pass it to the security staff here. And we can also, of course, take some questions from the floor. So before we start the meeting proper, can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile phones, as they do affect the broadcasting system. Having said that, I think, oh no, nobody's got their minutes on tablets today. Some people do sometimes, and they consult their committee papers on that. So agenda item 1 is the Housing Scotland Bill. Our first item of business today is to hear evidence from tenants' representatives on the provisions of the Housing Scotland Bill. So I welcome Eileen Campbell, Director of Tenants Information Service, Leslie Baird, the Chief Executive of Tenants Participation Advisory Service Scotland, Hugh McClung, Chair of Central Region Tenants Network, Jennifer MacLeod, Chair of Highland, Argyll and Bute Tenants Network, and last but not least, Kevin Patterson, Chair of Glasgow and Elan Sayre Tenants Network. So, Gil, I think you're going to start off the questioning for us this evening.
Well, I'm really pleased to be able to start this session off, since I'm doing the water from my own constituency in Clydebank, so it's good to be down here to my close neighbours and colleagues and people that work very, very close together with being involved with West Dumbartonshire Council. And being a member of Clydebank Mulgai, it's especially good, as I said, to be here. What I want to start the questioning off is with regards to the government's vision for housing in Scotland. And they say that all the people in Scotland live in, their aim is that all people in Scotland live in high quality, sustainable homes that they can afford, that meets their needs. That's what their vision is. And to what extent do you think this bill's provisions support this vision?
Who would like to start? You? It's okay.
It's okay, thank you. Ouch. If I may start, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this committee to give evidence. I think it's something that's been on the cards for quite a while in terms of the work that the regional networks have been doing. In response to your first question, there's much to welcome in this wide-ranging bill because of the aspects of the bill that are being proposed in terms of sustainability and protection for tenancies as well as landlords. And there's also provisions on the social sector allocations and also for the private rented sector, which is a much needed aspect of legislation required. We can also discuss that later. I think networks have been really pleased with the extensive consultations that have been going on since 2012. I and my colleague Jennifer, for example, were part and parcel of one of these working groups that were involved in the make-up of the bill, and we were delighted to do so. We particularly welcome the proposals by the bill to abolish right to buy, and we do feel this will have a great effect on protecting council stock, so this will also help tenancies in the future with the bill.
Got any Comments on the general provisions? Or whether it meets the vision of the government? Yes, Eileen, and then Kevin.
I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity this evening to give evidence. The Tenants Information Service is a national training and support organisation, and over the last few months we have, working with TPAS, organised a number of seminars and events throughout the country to find out tenants' views. So what we're hoping tonight is to feed back in the views of tenants that we've met throughout the country and also our members. And it's a wide-ranging bill. And there has, I would agree with you, been a lot of consultation on the separate aspects of the bill. And what we're really pleased to see is that certainly there's a lot of support for the abolition of the right to buy, and certainly what tenants have been saying is in terms of ensuring the supply of very much needed social rented housing, that this is something that they welcome in terms of ensuring that houses won't be lost. I think the estimate is there's about 14 houses.
If we keep the detail till later, because different sections, just in general.
So I think on the whole, in terms of the right to buy and the private rented sector, and certainly with regards to the social rented sector, it's really in relation to how tenancies will be managed, and we welcome these proposals.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Leslie.
I'd like to repeat what my colleagues have said and say thanks very much for the invite. It's always good to come along. As Eileen said, TPAS and TIS have been across Scotland recently and gathering the views of tenants. I think that it gathers together many of the threads that have been kind of hanging about, and certainly gathers together some good practice, because there's a lot of good practice happening in Scotland. But there was a lot of misunderstanding and the ways I think some of the parts of the practice was misinterpreted, or there were better interpretations, and I think this bill has done well to pull some of these strands together to clarify some practice across Scotland. I think it will help many of the areas, it will help many tenants to have a better idea of their status and how we actually practice housing. So we've brought a lot of the strands together. This bill has done really well, wide-ranging.
Okay. Yes, Jennifer.
Say that well, thank you for having me for one thing, but when I first read that vision a number of years ago, I thought, well, it would be wonderful. But we're actually moving towards it, and I think it is a wonderful vision for the people of Scotland, that their housing should be satisfactory and that they should be happy where they are.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Oh, sorry, Kevin.
Kevin, I thought you were just going to let that one go by, but fine, thanks.
I never let anything go by. I think you should realise that. Before we go any further, I again would like to thank you for inviting me to give evidence. And I again agree it's a wide-ranging bill that does tie up a lot of loose ends. A lot of these loose ends should have been tied up a long time ago, mind, but they are being tied up. But also the bill falls short in quite a number of categories and a number of places, which I'll come to later in the detail of the bill. So it is, in my opinion, it is by no means a fait accompli, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done, especially as you're heading for that overall housing vision.
Okay. On you go.
Sorry, thanks very much for that. One of the issues that was very quickly raised in your contribution was the process. And I just wondered about the process that was put in place for the organisations, and if you felt that the process was the right way to go. Did you engage? Was it set out in a way that you could fully engage? So more a process rather than any of the issues that is raised later on in our questioning.
The process of consultation.
Process of the consultation, yes.
Yeah, who wants to start on that, Anne?
I think there's been a lot of consultation. It was on the separate aspects of the housing bill. So over the last few years, tenants have had the opportunity to be consulted, but there's also been lots of other issues happening at the same time in terms of welfare reform and the Charter. So our experience is that there has been a lot for tenants and residents' organisations to respond to, but I think the consultation's been there. There are a couple of areas in the bill where there hasn't been consultation, particularly in relation to the powers of the housing regulator, and that's an area that certainly all of our consultation events was highlighted as an area that really does require further consultation.
Yep. Okay, Hugh?
Yes, there's been much consultation. I believe that a number of network representatives have been involved in sounding boards and working groups with the Scottish Government, highlighting some of the issues that ought to be considered within the bill. And notwithstanding that, the overall consultation, public consultation in the process, such as with the right to buy, for example, that was a great step forward, giving local people the choice to make whether or not they supported that issue or not. And I think, yes, you did very well with that, and I must commend you for that.
Leslie and then Kevin.
Extensive consultation, and I think one of the most important things was trying to excite people and entice them to come along, to not make it sound like it was a done deal and a dry, dusty subject. And I think we've worked very, very hard to let people know that this is a listening organisation and a doing organisation, and to try and give people evidence of how the Parliament has changed its mind by listening to the people who receive the services, for example, housing services. So I think by really stressing this is not a done deal, your views really count, has helped a lot of people to come forward who might not have done so in the past.
Okay, Kevin?
Thank you. I agree that the consultation has been very good, but you've consulted with tenants on a bill that affects potential tenants. And I do believe that there's quite a number of people who are on housing lists, people who are on homeless lists, who haven't been consulted, even though this bill will affect them. And I think that's where you've fallen short, where you haven't encouraged people who are on housing lists and people who are homeless to actually come forward and to give evidence and to get involved in the consultation process. So that's where I would say that the weakness really in this was, because this is a bill that does affect people on housing lists, and really I believe that they should have been consulted a lot more.
I suppose I've asked about the process. The next question that follows from that, do you think that you have been able to influence? Has there been stock taken of what's been said, and has there been a reaction to that?
Jennifer? I feel that we have been listened to, and that changes have been made as a result of what we've said. But there are some issues that have been missed out completely that tenants felt were very important, and suggestions that they came up with that they felt were very important. So it's two ways to look at it, but did welcome the consultation.
On that, I do want to say that whilst the process was structured in a way, the thoughts that were given from a tenant perspective, for example, looking at probationary tenancies, or even with a public sector housing panel, that was disregarded in the inclusion in the bill. And I felt that the result of the consultation exercise that was done on probationary tenancies, for example, the results of those who responded was quite significant, to say that there ought to be inclusion within the bill for that, but that was not taken up. So whilst I commend the processes that were done to initiate thoughts, we were listened to, we were heeded in what we were saying, what was suggested, and some fell by the wayside, but the majority we were heard about.
It actually goes deeper than that. I myself was involved in the Housing Policy Advisory Group when this was being discussed with Alec Neil back in 2009, 2010. So we've had involvement right from the very start, and these issues that you're bringing up were discussed at Housing Policy. And although they were included in the consultation, there was a great deal of debate, shall we say, as to whether these issues were appropriate for being put into the bill. So it did start. It started early on, and this government, I have to say, has been very good at involving the tenants' movement in their decisions, in their decision-making, but most of all in their planning for future housing projects. And I think that as long as that continues, then it'll only go from strength to strength.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Convener. That's me.
Right. Okay, right. We move on to part one of the bill, which is about the right to buy. And Mark, you're going to ask some questions on this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Convener. I've got a range of questions round about the right to buy proposals. First up, just if you're able to outline what you think the advantages and disadvantages of right to buy as it stands have been for landlords and tenants.
First.
The tenants movement have been against the right to buy since the moment it was first envisioned. It has ripped the heart out of social housing in Scotland. Right across from the Highlands to the borders, it has ripped the heart out of social housing, and it has meant that waiting lists have been increased tenfold since the first time it came. We're pleased to see it ending. We have to say we're pleased to see it ending. We think it's about time. But we don't see why it has to wait for 3 years to be ended. We don't know why that is. I mean, at the moment, the right to buys are falling off, but as the economic downturn gets better, the right to buy will creep up again. And we think that we're missing an opportunity of stopping losing houses that we're going to lose over the next 3 years. They could be stopped if we stop the right to buy straight away.
Leslie, and then Hugh.
I would have to agree with Kevin. I think that we feel that 3 years is too long. And I know that we have to make sure that people have that right and they have the time to make up their mind within that time. There were some concerns expressed at some of the sessions that we had about a spike in the right to buy if it was taken away, and there were some thoughts that it might die out naturally, but the majority of people said that they thought that action should be taken now, but not 3 years. There were some issues round about unscrupulous companies coming in and offering to buy flat or houses for people, and there was real worries about that. But the majority of one or two people thought just let it die out. But the majority of the sessions we held were tenants were absolutely stop the right to buy. Do not allow 3 years. Somebody suggested a week, but we thought that was a wee bit too short to allow tenants to exercise their right to buy. But certainly very, very strong feelings round about that. In terms of the pressurised status is there for a reason, and the majority of tenants felt that if you don't have the right to buy now, you should not be given the right to buy, even though you have pressure. There was some suggestion that could be lifted. That certainly wasn't a very popular suggestion from the sessions that we've done so far.
Would you say Hugh and then Eileen?
Thank you. Just to answer your point, again, reiterating that we welcome the positive measure that the ceasing of the right to buy has given us. Tenants up and down the land, as Kevin has reiterated, have been given quite a significant boost because there is that measure of stock for the landlord that is protected. And with that, landlords will see a better influx, be able to plan ahead for their financial structures and rent accounts. They will be able to look at how best that they can now preserve that stock. The difficulty, which I can't answer you for, is of course with the protected status. And pressured area status is something for your legal representatives to work out. Whether or not somebody will mount a legal challenge once the period has elapsed, I don't know. I can't see it, but that's my personal view. I can't see it. Networks don't believe that there will be a challenge to pressured area status. However, that's not to say there won't be. But by and large, the advantages for landlords will be see a protection of their stock. Tenants will have a better choice of home. And for that matter, I agree with my colleagues that 3-year period is too long. I think within the European Human Rights Act, there are sort of leeways about what length of time. It doesn't stipulate a length of time, but I accept that there are legal rights that any person with that right to buy has. Whether or not that's 3 years, I can't agree to that. I think 1 year is sufficient.
Anybody else? Yes, Jennifer and then Eileen.
No, I was just going to say I agree with the 1 year. I was in two minds at the outset about right to buy. I chose not to. My family members did take up the opportunity. In fact, one of them moved to another house because it was more like the type that she wanted to buy. She did a swap with somebody. But while I was happy for them and for a lot of others, in a very short time I could see the reduction in the numbers of houses available for rent. And we have a right to rent as well as a right to buy. And I really feel it has done such damage to the amount of housing stock that's available over the years. And I'm so glad that it's finishing. And as Hugh said, I definitely agree with the 1 year being enough.
Eileen?
So much consensus on this issue, and I think I agree with almost every aspect of what's been said prior to this. I mean, the two key things are supply, but also the impact for people who chose to buy and were not able to afford the maintenance and improvement. So we're seeing the massive issues that have resulted as a result of that issue. So in terms of supply and also protection for people who don't want to be in that position, there's real support, but abolition for everyone at the same time. The critical issue about right to buy is it's so complex. And obviously any change, it has to be very clear when that will happen, when the right to buy would end. Certainly the consultation that we carried out, there'll be a difference. I think most people are saying a year here, but it was 18 months to 2 years, the feedback that we were getting, but certainly shorter than 3 years. And the main concern there really is about forward planning for landlords at a time of recession. And also the concern that people might feel under pressure to seek funding to purchase a property that they can't actually afford. So I think that the tenants, there's real support as long as it's very clear for tenants who've still got the right to buy what all of this actually means.
Okay, Mark?
We've touched on some of the difficulties around removing the right to buy in areas that have already been designated as pressured areas. When this bill comes into force, it doesn't stop any local authority applying for pressured area status to any area, regardless of the provisions in the bill. Just to ask about your views around that. I mean, it's not inconceivable that the whole of Scotland could be designated as pressured area status in the 3-year period that people lose their right to buy, just to see if you have any thoughts on that provision still being available to local authorities while the 3-year period is running its course.
Yeah, I welcome pressured area status across Scotland for 100 years, if you like. I don't want to see one more house going to the open market. I think it's a headache for landlords as well as tenants because they can't get a home. As in the given aims of the Scottish Government, they can't get a home that they have a right to. Similarly, with the right to buy, people who are on a protected status do still have that right. They have the right to challenge in the court if that's so wished. But I don't see a big influx of a rush to buy in this next 3 years, whenever this bill becomes royal asset. Even given the fact that we've got 1 or 3 years, it doesn't matter. I don't see a big rush to buy. So I welcome pressured area status. If every local authority in the land continues it for 100 years, I will be more than happy.
Anyone else?
I think that says it all, really.
No? Agreed.
Right, just finally then, and just to ask if the bill goes ahead and right to buy is ended, what responsibility the Scottish Government, social landlords and local councils and organisations like yourself will have in providing tenants with that information, giving them advice as to how they're going about exercising the right to buy if they choose to do so in those 3 years, and what's the best route to make them aware of that?
Jennifer, and then Eileen, and then Leslie.
I feel that these houses were built for renting. They were not built to buy. They weren't built to be sold. And if somebody wants to buy a house, well, they can look for one and buy it. It may be difficult, it may be more difficult for them, but as far as I'm concerned, there should not be a right to buy, full stop.
Okay, and then Eileen and Leslie and Kevin.
With regards guidance, probably we would recommend that there was guidance given in terms of right to buy, and the key things is when it would start, when the process would end. But the key issue is that people need to know where to get information locally. They would have to obviously contact their landlord to ensure what right they have. We as an information organisation would like to get guidance in terms of just so that we're clear in the information that we're sharing with tenants and landlords throughout Scotland. So that would be a recommendation for government guidance.
Okay, Leslie and then Kevin.
I think there is a responsibility to get information out really quickly before the mythology starts and it begins to take on a life of its own. Before the insurance companies start knocking on people's doors saying, we'll buy your house for you and we'll give you a fortnight in Spain, just send it back to us again. And what we really need is the facts, the guidance laid out very clearly. For example, we got a question at one of our sessions that if you apply to buy within the 3-year or the 1-year period, how long does that apply? That say a live application? So if I apply to buy the day before it stops, will I still have the right to buy in 10 years' time? So we need to be very clear to people, absolute facts, what it is, clarity, no mythology, just the straight facts, and that has to come out very, very quickly. Whoever takes on that responsibility, I would imagine the Scottish Government would do that in the first place, and then that would go down to landlords. We would be happy to give people information, factual information, to try and stem and scorch some of the rumours.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions on? Oh, sorry, Kevin.
Thank you. I agree with what Leslie says, that getting the information out quickly and getting it out correctly is the way to go forward. But I'd also like to expand on your question a little bit. When you talk about RSLs, registered social landlords, many RSLs rely on right to buy receipts for their business plan. And this will be another thing that you're going to have coming back to you when you end the right to buy, is that many RSLs are going to be coming screaming for compensation to the Scottish Government, asking why you've taken this out of our business plan. This was written to our business plan. This is a business plan that you agreed when either we took over the stock or whatever. So that is another aspect of the right to buy that you'll probably have to come aware of in the future, that many RSLs will want to get the information out there because they'll want to get right to buy receipts in because it's part of their business plan. So that is a warning across the bows from me personally. But as for getting information out to tenants, then I think that timely information and the correct information in a form that they can understand, they are the imperative things that you have to do. And as for the timescales, if somebody applies for the right to buy and they want to hold that right to buy for any longer than 3 months, then that surely cannot be the case.
Interestingly, on your first point, we've heard welcomed from RSLs that it means that when they go to the banks for finance, it's more likely that they'll get finance because they have stability of their housing stock. So there's perhaps two sides to that argument, but you make an interesting point. Anybody else got any questions on right to buy then? No? Okay, if we move on. The policy memorandum to the bill at paragraph 42 indicates that the Scottish Government is committed to supporting home ownership in other ways, for example, through the low-cost initiative for first-time buyers. So do you have any comments to make about the range of schemes offered by the Scottish Government to support home ownership? And are these appropriate for tenants who may not have the right to buy anymore but may otherwise wish to have, who they might have exercised their right to buy but can now use these other schemes? Yes, Kevin?
Thank you. I think that it has to be a range of properties available for tenants to be able to but you still need to have that ownership aspiration, if you like, amongst tenants if you wanted to free up tenancies further down the line. And I think the shared equity fills a gap in the market for people. But one of the things that have caught a lot of people out with buying shared equity flats is the Factoring Act. And we've had a number of tenants who have bought lift properties with a 20% share held by the government, and then they've suddenly been hit by factoring charges that they didn't understand, and these factoring charges are sometimes as much as their mortgages. So there has to be a range of products, and there has to be the right products that are available for people to fulfil their aspirations. We in the tenants movement have nothing wrong. We don't think there's anything wrong with people having the aspiration to buy houses. We just don't want them buying social housing. So if the government wants to put forward propositions to help them, as long as it's not using money out of the HRA or money out of housing receipts that RSLs have brought in, then that's fine by us.
It was actually brought up by the Justice Committee recently in an inquiry they did in terms of factoring costs that people weren't made aware of. Yeah, Hugh?
Just a brief point, Convener. I think that to be broadly welcomed in terms of those who may wish to buy in the private sector can get that, forgive the terminology, initial leg up in terms of funding for assistance with mortgages. The trouble with that is that the private sector market is so volatile, and in recent years we have seen boom and bust regimes in terms of house prices and so on. Much maligned mortgage to rent schemes come into play because people could no longer afford the rent. So any scheme that is brought out to help people purchase their own home, if that's what they wish, yes, I'd welcome that.
Okay, we'll now move on to part... Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
I don't really, I agree with all the points raised. The key thing is that people understand what it is that they're purchasing and buying into. And in the same way, when people bought from Right to Buy, the key issue that was learned there was people fully understanding what responsibilities go with these options. So no one would deny people the right to have a choice to purchase. But certainly in terms of shared equity, information has to be very clear exactly what that means and what implications there are.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else? No. Right. So if we move on to part 2 of the bill then, which is about social housing. Alex, you've got some questions on that.
Thank you, Convener. Now, I wanted to ask a wee bit about allocations policy. And the first thing I was going to ask, to give you an opportunity to express your views, was what do you think about the way social landlords currently allocate their housing? Do you think they need greater flexibility, and why?
Thank you. I think that as far as allocations are concerned, we in the tenants movement believe that allocation should always be by need, and it should always be needs driven, and it's the need of the tenant that should always be paramount when it comes to allocations. Taking into account other aspects of their lifestyles and things like that are fair enough, but it should always be based on need.
Yes, Hugh.
I think it's not just greater than the need. I think we have to look at tenants' aspirations for their lifestyle, for their family commitment. Young couples starting out who may not be able to afford private ownership or rent can always look to a local landlord for renting accommodation. They may have aspirations of a family. This bill goes some ways in doing that, looking at the social aspect of not just about whether or not you're homeless or whether you're under-occupied or something else. It looks at the whole concept. And I think if we could do that and expand it along with a measure of support packages that are there for first-time tenancies, then yes, we're going a long way to doing things right.
Okay, Leslie.
I really agree with flexibility and allocations, and I think many of the tenants we spoke to across Scotland agreed with that as well. If we want to sort of go down into detail, I'm not sure if you do at this point about the age one specifically. There are great concerns about, yes, it's absolutely wonderful, and people still think that sheltered housing is only for older people, when in fact sheltered housing is for people who have a specific need. A bit of worry about young people being continued to be excluded from housing because they're seen as a problem rather than as part of a solution. So making sure that whatever we do, that young people are not excluded from allocations. But we do welcome where we used to be able to sort of put people of a particular age or a particular ability together, and they had a lifestyle that didn't clash with each other. So being very aware of sensitivity of lettings, and absolutely really the more flexibility, but without excluding people, the better.
Eileen.
Key things that tenants say to us when we ask them what do you think of the allocations policies, they often say they don't really understand it. They don't understand the legislation, how it applies in practice. Some of that might be based on people's own personal experience because the allocation policy hasn't resulted in them getting the house. But we often work with groups who say that they find that the system quite inflexible. So tenants will say, yes, we welcome more flexibility. And you could probably ask every single person in this row about their view about the age, but certainly the tenants that we spoke to said they welcomed the opportunity to take age into consideration on a number of reasons. That people talk about the past when decisions were taken about ensuring trying to avoid lifestyle differences of putting people of certain ages in houses that were appropriate and suitable. I think the key thing about flexibility is that it has to be clear that it's meeting house and need and it doesn't discriminate. And I think that what most local tenants and residents say is they want allocations policy that are common sense and flexible and result in sustainable communities, because that's what's at the heart of this really is sustainable communities. We welcome the new requirement that there is now consultation if there are any changes to the allocations policy, and obviously what will result from this bill is there will be changes to allocations, so we welcome that as a positive step forward.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to add just another point to Mr Johnson. It's not that we see younger people as the ogre in this issue. I think, as Leslie had commented on, there needs to be a measure of sensitive letting. And in that term, we need to be working with our younger people and best about sustainability. I think that's the name of the origins when we're working with younger people, how we integrate them into society or into local housing, and how best to deal with that. Because often as not, young people have a tendency which might be short-lived. They tend to move from pillar to post quite quickly. So in order to help them sustain that, it's better if we have a properly integrated policy, which is a bit of flexibility as well. And I think we need to look at that.
Okay, Kevin?
Can I come in there with regarding young people and tenancy sustainability rates? I can only speak for Glasgow, but the tenancy sustainability rates for 16 to 25-year-olds in Glasgow is 68%. 68% after a year are still in their tenancy. I don't think that's a particularly low figure, and it's certainly not most young people. I think what happened in Glasgow was after the Heriot-Watt University did their survey in 2006, looking at how young people should be supported to go into tenancies and how they can be sustained. And the work of people like Aspire, people like Y People, have really brought on young people into tenancies, giving them the chance to have their own tenancies, test tenancies, with Aspire, especially in the north of Glasgow, where they can go into their own home and they can be supported within that home to look into their own tenancy. And these have really brought these tenancies on a long way, especially the work of people like Y People, who not only show them how to keep their tenancy, but they show them how to join a community and how to become involved in decision-making and really empower them to get engaged in their community. And I think that sometimes young people are demonised because you hear about the small number who don't keep their tenancies, the small number who are involved in antisocial behaviour. But you don't hear about the vast numbers of people who come through organisations like Aspire and Y People and go on to lead really good, fulfilling lives. And that support can last for 6 months or it can last for 2 years. And then they're never forgotten, and as they're put into their tenancies. I mean, I really do believe that we have to treat 16-year-olds as adults. We want them to behave like adults, so we have to teach them like adults, treat them like adults. And I think that's vitally important. And I would also like to say that I hope that you've had some evidence from Aspire and from Y People into the aspects of this bill.
Just to complete that, if you like, I've picked up a degree of positive reaction to the increased level of flexibility. Would you take the view that you're opposed to that flexibility? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not opposed to flexibility in allocations. What I'm opposed to is it not meeting the needs of the people who need housing. If you need a house and there's a house available, you should get that house regardless of your age or regardless of anything. And if you need the support to keep that house, then you should get that support. If you start saying to local authorities and RSLs that they have flexibility, they don't have to give these to young people, then they'll take the cheapest option. They'll say, if we take this young person into this house, we're going to have to give them a support package, which is going to cost a lot of money. So let's see if we can maybe put somebody else in there and use the flexibility allocations. And I'd hate to think that it came down to money in the end. It should always be about housing need.
about the idea of grouping people by age group, for example. But do you think there's any other way that this kind of flexibility could be used? Is there anything else we should consider putting into the bill that would allow greater flexibilities where needed?
That is directed directly at me. Right, okay, fair enough. Then, I think that grouping people together in sheltered housing, fair enough, and where people have needs and those needs are met within a sheltered housing unit. But if you're talking about a mixed community, then to keep the mix of the community, yes, you can use the allocations, the flexibility of allocations, but the need should always be driving it. The need for housing should always be driving it. I mean, you're not going to give a single person a 3-bedroom family house. Or you're not going to give a family with 3 kids a single-bedroom tenement flat. I mean, there always is this flexibility within the housing allocations. You don't allocate houses according to your wants. You allocate them according to the needs of the families.
There has been a certain lack of flexibility in the system over recent years, and this bill proposes to bring a degree of flexibility back. Is there anything else that we should be considering during the passage of this bill that would give a desired flexibility to allocations policy?
Build more houses.
There's not a section in the bill about that, but we'll deal with that in other ways.
Consider the different needs that people have for housing. Their family situation, as well as age. And we've also got to consider the fact that it takes a long time for an estate to gel, if you know what I mean. When a number of people move in, it takes a long time for the cohesion of the residents or tenants working together. It doesn't happen right away. And I think being sensitive with letting now is very important, and that's why I welcome the flexibility aspect of it, because there could be someone wanting a house fairly near an older person in the family, and it's if they don't come right to the top of the list when a house is available near a family member, not just because they like the family member, but because they need to help support the family member or their support systems are around them. It's unfortunate that some of the larger houses were sold off, because I know of an instance where a couple with 7 children waited and waited and waited in their 3-bedroom house. They were offered one quite a distance away, but their support system was around them on our area, you know. And they eventually moved with their seven children into a 4-bedroomed house. But they had to wait and wait and wait. And there was an urgent, now, okay, maybe they shouldn't have had 7 children, but that's not part of the housing bill. But when they were when they were expecting children 5 and 6, twins, they were waiting to get a larger house. And they turned down, as I said, further away ones. Well, they ended up with 7 before they got a move. There needs to be more sensitivity, more thought, more flexibility, as we're talking about, and that's why I welcome it. It's just examples like that where children were concerned and a family that needed local support. But also there's ill people, there's older people who are needing a bit of extra support, and the houses are needed to be close to them.
It's not about what else you can put into it, it's how you determine what you've already got. In that respect, with the bill's proposals being specific about certain categories and looking at the expansion of how those are channelled into the allocation, sorry about that, those that are channelled into the allocation system. Yes, the allocation system complicated, but if you could make that a bit more flexible, as the bill proposes, then you're going a long way to doing what you need to do to make sure people are housed correctly and that the community they're involved in is sustainable. And I think if you get that right, you'll be doing fine.
The bill also makes changes to qualifying periods for joint tenancies, subletting, assignations and successions. What are your views on these provisions, and do you agree with the Scottish Government that this will help social landlords make the best use of their existing housing stock?
Absolutely. I think there's been concern across communities about perceptions of queue jumping, particularly with assignations. And again, it's something that the guidance is going to be all, because people have to know that if they begin to cohabit with someone, that the minute the clock starts ticking, if you like, then that status is going to have to be let the landlord know. So there's going to have to be a lot of information going out there, but absolutely support the proposals to change the assignation and subletting, because as we've all said, housing is based on need, and there have been some inappropriate assignations, and there has been a suggestion that the option for assignation should be taken away from tenants and be given to landlords to assign, but we still want to see tenants have that ability to be able to assign, but it just has to be used a bit better. So yes, definitely support that.
Okay, Eileen and Kevin.
Totally agree with what Leslie said. The feedback that we've had is people think that this is fair and it's clear. What needs to be clearer, though, is that not everyone is aware that it has to be in their main residence. I think that there has to be information that the landlord provides that makes it very clear that it's 12 months from the period of which it was your main residence. And that was an issue that I think was raised at almost every consultation event. But also, I think that there's a clause, or one of the provisions is that if someone wants to assign a property, they won't be able to if it meant they'd be under-occupying or they weren't in housing need. So I think there's support that clause. But on the whole, yes, there's support for that.
I agree again, and I think this is probably one of the most important aspects of this bill as far as the tenants' movement are concerned, because one of the complaints that we get as tenant representatives is this perception of queue jumping, this perception of people moving in with their parents and that, so they can get the house assigned to them. And it was one of the things through the right to buy, especially that we noticed was happening, that older people were having younger people moving with them and they were buying the property and moving it on. So we do support this in its form at the moment, yes.
Okay.
I'd like to put in an air of caution in this, if I might. Whilst I accept, and as do network representatives accept, that there is broad support for the extension of timescales for assignations and so on, we have to be careful of how it's determined. For example, if there is a qualifying need for a person who may be extremely ill, so there may be mitigating circumstances where that period of 12 months can't be reached if the person, perhaps, forgive me for suggesting, may be terminally ill. Do we have the flexibility to then look at something else? I think we might need to give some kind of direction on that from the Scottish Government side, but it's an off chance, but I think just a wee bit caution with that.
Up with the Minister when we get to that stage. That's me.
Any more questions on lettings? No? Okay, if we move on to antisocial behaviour, and Mary, you've got some questions on that.
Thank you. I want to focus a bit more on the antisocial behaviour and the SSSTs, because the bill contains provisions that are aimed at giving social landlords more tools to tackle antisocial behaviour. And the proposals include allowing landlords to suspend an applicant from receiving an offer of housing, widening the circumstances in which landlords can use SSSTs, and simplifying the process for evicting tenants. So could you perhaps give me a flavour of the impact that antisocial behaviour has on the areas you cover, and what difference do you think the new proposals will make in comparison to what currently you can use?
This has been a long time coming. Antisocial behaviour has been a dog bone in the back of people in really excellent communities. A few years ago, the then Housing and Communities Minister, Alex Neil, asked network representatives to look at the strategy about antisocial behaviour. And we, a late colleague, wrote a document called Decline in Communities. And it was presented to Alex Neil with a view that what was wrong with the system was it was so long in taking up evidence. For example, in antisocial behaviour, you have a catalogue of diary of events, you have proposals of witness strategy, you have an application to the courts, for example. All of this taking time and taking its toll on communities at large. I have to say, though, it's not all of a bad penny. I'm not trying to propose that every community is like that. That's not the issue. The issue where there is clear, defined antisocial behaviour, this bill takes a long way from what it used to be in terms of identifying. And the proposal where the landlord can suspend from SSST to a Scottish secure tenancy. Yes, we welcome this. What is disappointing, though, is that tenants had proposed a probationary tenancy or initial tenancy so that all new applicants would have a 12-month period applied to them as a SSST. Unfortunately, this was not put into the context of the bill. But network representatives felt really strongly about this because in 2012 there was a consultation exercise conducted by the Scottish Government which resulted in those who responded, 67% of landlords and tenants supported a probationary or an initial tenancy, as networks like to call it, so that it would give landlords the time and wherewithal to identify problem areas. Again, it was not to conclude that everybody would automatically be an antisocial person. But obviously it would give landlords time to identify, because it's very difficult for local landlords to identify those who are of antisocial tendencies, shall we say. So that 12-month initial tenancy would have allowed them time to find out if persons were of that nature. And alternatively, if no one was of that typical tendency, then they would revert straight into the Scottish secure tenancy from having a 12-month probationary period. I support what's there in the bill so that landlords have that exclusive power with which to do that, and I welcome that, but I think it would be better if we'd had a probationary tenancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
From you, you're next.
An awful long time to spend on something that's not actually in the bill. So I mean that's fine. But initial tenancies and probationary tenancies are unacceptable. They are an erosion of the Scottish secure tenancy. They are taking away the tenant's right. The Scottish secure tenancy is something that we'll fight to our dying breath to keep the Scottish secure tenancy. From the rent strikes of 1915 in Glasgow, right the way through to the centenary in 2015 of Mary Barber's army, we will fight for the Scottish secure tenancy. Why should everybody be tarred with the same brush? Why should you be accused of being possible antisocial behaviour? Would it be right to accuse somebody going to Marks and Spencer of being a possible shoplifter? If they were to follow you around all the time or not let you in parts of the shop, I'm sorry, you haven't proved yourself not to be a shoplifter. So therefore you can't come in this part of Marks and Spencer until you've proven yourself not to be a shoplifter. You wouldn't accept it. It would be unacceptable. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of Glasgow and Western Isles, it was totally unacceptable to bring in probationary tenancies, and we were pleased to see it wasn't in the bill.
Okay, anything else? Yeah, Jennifer and then Eileen. And then...
I think that in Marks and Spencer's there's CCTV and a whole lot of security people who are watching the customers. And I feel that with an initial tenancy, if everybody is on a level playing field or whatever, or all in the same boat, whichever way you want to look at it, nobody can point the finger and say, that one's only got a short tenancy because he or she is being watched to see how they behave. If everybody is in that situation, there won't be any of that. But I know there will be difficulties with getting houses furnished, carpeted, whatever, when you're on a short-term tenancy, but I'm sure there is something that could come out of that, and that the majority of people will be looking after their home, will be a good tenant, and will be able to continue to a secure tenancy. But I really am very much in favour of initial tenancies, not probationary, initial. And I think there's a lot in the wording.
Eileen and then Leslie, and I'll come back to you, Karen.
Probably isn't consensus on this issue in terms of probably support the point that you raised there in terms of if you take away people's rights, that's almost saying that every new tenant potentially could do something that's antisocial. But if you ask tenants throughout Scotland, there really wasn't consensus when we checked. There was extreme polarised views depending on people's experiences. As an organisation, TIS's position is that we wouldn't be advocating probationary tenancies because we don't actually think that there's enough evidence at this stage that would have a major impact in addressing the issues of antisocial behaviour. Tenants welcome anything at all that's going to strengthen powers that landlords have to deal with antisocial behaviour. It's the top agenda issue in every single community in Scotland, based on people's perceptions and also the reality of what's happening. So whatever we think as a group of people here, it's the top issue. So anything that's going to strengthen what happens. So I actually think that what's in the bill is just tightening up things that are already there. And everyone would welcome that, but I don't think the bill in itself, the measures that are there are going to tackle, it's not going to be the solution to the antisocial behaviour issue in Scotland. I think that what's required is the agencies continue to work together, that housing organisations, support agencies, the police and local communities, I think that's a central issue in all of this, work together. It's not the government's position to resolve the antisocial behaviour issue, but a critical issue is funding. If the resource and support services aren't funded on the ground at local levels to do that, that's the critical issue. So we would welcome the provisions that are there. They tighten up what already exists. It is a major issue for tenants, but I think the critical issue is funding in terms of local initiatives and organisations working together.
Okay, Leslie?
I have to agree with just about everything that's said, which leaves me on the fence somewhere or other. There was no consensus at any of the sessions that we did. There was very strong views, both for and against probationary tenancies. I think there was an agreement that the word probationary tenancies was an unpleasant word, and that if there was to be something, an initial tenancy, then the word probation should be taken out. There was some suggestions round about, in terms of extensions to the SSST, that was well and good, and they could understand why the profession might want that. But I think the quote was said a couple of times, you don't have to live next door. So it's about making sure that whatever happens, that the support is there, the infrastructure is there, and that people are working together. There were some issues around about clarity on what is antisocial behaviour, and can we get some clarity on what it actually means, and clarity around about the part in the bill that mentions convictions. Conviction for what? So I think for a lot of these things, it was guidance was required to where you would offer a short SST. But you could be convicted for dogfiling, so it was really important that it was absolute clarity came in on these areas. I think people were keen to see people being very supported throughout their tenancies to help people sustain their tenancies. And nobody mentioned the youth card. Nobody says, oh, it's all young people, which was really good. But there needs to be tenancy sustainment. It's going to cost a lot of money. And there was a fair bit of scepticism about the amount of funds that would be required to do this, and people saying it's just not going to happen. But in the main, there was no consensus at any of the sessions we had about probationary tenancies, but absolute about support and helping people to stay in their homes.
That's interesting you say that about money, because we heard earlier on today that an eviction could cost something between 25 and 32,000. So it's kind of spending to save, isn't it, if you can stop an eviction and get people secure in their homes. Yeah, Kevin.
It is indeed about multi-agency support and putting that support in place. But I'll come back to probationary tenancies, because I want you to understand who'll be caught up in these tenancies, because anybody that changes or transfers properties gets a new tenancy with their landlord. So they'll have to go on probationary tenancies. So it could be somebody who's been in their house for 30 years without a blemish on their character. They have to move property to downsize. They take out a new tenancy with their landlord. They have to go on a probationary tenancy. It doesn't really seem fair. We could not even envisage any point where probationary tenancy would actually work. Yes, the use of the short secure tenancy and reverting tenancies when antisocial behaviour has been done into short secure tenancies, yes, we could see the merit in that, but we couldn't see the merit in tarring everybody with the same brush.
Okay.
Bill will also introduce a right of appeal to a sheriff for a person whose application has been suspended. Do you think that's the right way to go? Will it be beneficial?
Kevin?
It comes back down to the housing panel and why we would have liked to have seen a housing panel for social housing as well as for private rented, because we feel there should be a simplified way of going about things, and there should be a first-tier tribunal that people can go to instead of having to go to the Sheriff's Court all the time. So we would have liked to have seen that in the bill, but there does have to be a right of appeal, and if that right of appeal is through the Sheriff's Court, then so be it.
Certainly we've heard in evidence that people think that the RSL should be able to go to the first-tier tribunals, and that's obviously something we'll look at going forward. Any other views before I move on? No? Okay.
Sorry, just briefly, I support the move that, that goes to the tribunal, but more and importantly, what Kevin has just said is the point about the first-tier tribunal. I think the process with which the court principles lie is long-winded, if you'll allow me to suggest that. And also, if I could just quote where the proposal with this bill is that we have the first-tier tribunal to look at disputes or antisocial behaviour appeals and such like. Lord Gill, an eminent Lord Judiciary, if you like to call him that, has suggested that this shouldn't be considered at all, that the courts should deal with threats of eviction and or such like. I would say to Lord Gill, sorry, not on, it's too long, it's not high on your agenda, and it costs local authorities thousands. So yes, we welcome this, and if it needs to be, at the end of the day, if it has to go before the sheriff, then so be it.
Comments? Jennifer?
When we came up with the idea, this idea, along with many others, but our thinking was that it was something like, it would be something like a tribunal for somebody who feels they've been unfairly dismissed or something like that. It would be almost their peers or people who understood the situation, who would be dealing with it. As it is, it's not only money, it's the hours and hours of staff time that go into taking forward an eviction. Time that when they could have been doing other work that would benefit tenants, and it gets to a sheriff who happens to be very much against evictions, so it just gets thrown out. It's one man's or one person's decision. I'm not pro-evictions. I would rather see them avoided. I'd rather see something like a panel or a tribunal where they would look at all the different aspects, a multi-agency approach to try to solve the problem, not necessarily to go for eviction, although it's such a costly affair that it's usually a last resort, an action of last resort.
That certainly mirrors some of the evidence we've heard today about the length of time it takes to get to the point of eviction. And quite often when you do get in front of a sheriff, if the sheriff is not supportive of that, then it doesn't happen. And landlords and tenants are back to square one, as are the neighbours around the tenant. The Govan Law Centre told the committee that tenants don't want to lose their homes and there should be more support available to tenants, and agencies should be working more closely with tenants that are maybe involved in antisocial behaviour. Is that a view that you share? And do you have any views on any other types of protections there should be for tenants that are on triple STs?
I do believe that there should be a lot more support, and I realise that it will be costly. But we also have to consider the fact that there are mental illnesses that cause people to behave differently to, shall we say, the norm, whatever that is. And that anything that's done is not really going to fix the problem because of the illness that the person's suffering from. And I think that a lot more needs to be thought about there, because evicting that person is not the answer. Support from different areas, I think, is needed there.
Especially given the cost of eviction.
Aye. Yeah. And the fact that this person has to be rehomed, and someone who is seriously mentally ill is not fit for an eviction, cannot cope with homelessness. And I think that needs to be thought about.
I think I could only agree that there's a lot more support required to help people sustain their tenancy at whatever level that they need. Eviction is always a case of last resort because landlords want to keep tenants and not throw them out. But there are situations where, I mean, if it was a panel, it would be a panel of peers, a panel of experts, because we've heard of cases where it's been a particularly remote rural area, a visiting sheriff comes from one of the cities, and it seems very trivial. That would never happen in Glasgow, so you're off. You know, you can stay in your tenancies. So it would give a more cohesive and understood approach. But certainly it is going to be very expensive, but we would like to see more support put in to help people sustain their tenancies.
Thanks, yeah. I think the multi-agency approach is something that is vitally important, but I also think that RSLs have to have strategies in place to deal with these things. And I think that a lot of the onus has to be put on the RSLs to have these support agencies on their books so that they know where to go to when this sort of thing happens. I know that, again, I'm going to shout about Glasgow because I can only really speak from Glasgow because that's who I'm representing at the moment. But our tenant sustainability strategy has an antisocial behaviour part of it, where it shows the sort of support that will be given to people, not only victims of antisocial behaviour, but people who are being antisocial, but sometimes don't even know it. And finding out the reasons why the antisocial behaviour happens. But there are times when no matter what you do, no matter what support you put in there, the antisocial behaviour is going to continue, and it will continue until you evict them. And that is a fact. But with the housing panel, you don't have the fear of the sheriff court either. So even for the tenants and even for the landlord, there is that it's a lower tier of judiciary, and that there isn't that fear of the sheriff's court. Because I know that a lot of people that I work with, the sheriff's court letter is terrifying for them. It really is terrifying for them. But there's nobody there for them when that letter comes through. And I think that it's true that you should have that support available so that when they get the letter saying that they're being either evicted or they're being thing for antisocial behaviour, there should be somebody there to support them as well as the victims.
Okay, Eileen.
Of really good initiatives, and you've probably heard about them over the last few weeks when you've been hearing from other organisations. Most local authorities and housing associations now have staff who specifically focus on, it's quite hard to say, tenancy sustainment officers, and that is looking to ensure that people can stay in their home and also be able to afford to live in their home. And obviously with the welfare reform proposals, there's critical issues for the future of social rented housing in Scotland. So I think there's a lot of work already taking place. The challenge that landlords have is that if you're a tenant suffering from antisocial behaviour, it's the most critical situation that you can experience. But then the landlord has to adhere within legislation and good practice and all the other things that happen. So it's a real challenge. But I think that there's a lot of good work happening out there, and that really just has to be developed. But we also welcome, if they're going to extend the short Scottish secure tenancies up to 18 months, that there is support in place. That could be a positive thing for a tenant who just needs that bit of support to be able to stay in the house. But it's a balance, isn't it? The balance in terms of supporting the person who's the victim of antisocial behaviour and supporting the person who's causing the problem is always going to be the balance. And I think that's why it's always such a controversial issue.
Hugh?
I think it's fair to say that it's not really necessary to put something in, sort of something else in, to the process whereby you're reducing from the triple ST to the SST. I think that colleagues here on the table have already stipulated the support measures that are required within that. Having said that, there's a long process which we all know about before we get to that stage. And if within the support mechanism we can avoid going to that stage where we reduce to SST, for example, I know a lot of landlords who do that already and say, look, if you continue with this behaviour, you lose the right to your home or you lose the right to have a secure tenancy. That is clearly explained, and I think if we stay with that and build up the support measures with that, it'll be fine. Yes.
That's fine, thank you.
Is that
Yes, can I cover it?
okay? Anybody else got any questions on antisocial behaviour? No? Any further? Oh, well, yours are, aren't they? Just before I come on to you, anybody? Right, okay, carry on.
Convener, thank you very much. I just want to stay with the theme that Ms Campbell identified, which is this constant challenge that we have to balance the rights of tenants to a secure tenancy. Hard won over many years, as Mr Patterson was saying earlier, with the need to tackle antisocial behaviour. The point that was made, I think, effectively by Mr McClone when he said that often the process is one that is taking its time and taking its toll on families that are affected. So really what I'd like to know from each of the panel members is to what extent has the bill as currently drafted got that balance right, specifically in relation to section 15, which seeks to simplify the eviction process in the case of very serious cases of antisocial behaviour.
Who would like to go first on that? Hugh, you ready?
I think that the position about simplifying the process, I think it has already been said in terms of the construction by where we have to look at professional witnesses, for example. Some landlords are identifying members of staff because there's no corroborative evidence or people are unwilling to have evidence in terms of that. I think if we simplify that process by reducing the amount of identifying the issue, and we have the support mechanism, has already been said as well, then I would agree that we could go to the court, but only as a last resort. Nobody wants to support evictions at all.
So you'd be supportive of
I beg your pardon?
You would be supportive of the proposals in the bill then?
Yes.
Karen?
Can I just clarify that you're talking about allocations of housing? Section 50.
Tackling antisocial behaviour.
Antisocial behaviour
and
by...
the proposal to simplify the eviction process is set out in section 15.
Right, yeah, well, we agree that antisocial behaviour is a problem for both the victim of antisocial behaviour and the person who's been antisocial. But we're also quite careful about erosion of rights, and that although antisocial behaviour may be prevalent in one household, it may not be the whole household that's involved in the antisocial behaviour.
So what conclusion have you come to then in terms of the proposals?
I think that
still to reach one.
I'm still to reach one on the aspects of that, but at stage 2, when they flesh the meat out onto the bones, it'll be a lot easier to see what the direction is with that. I think that's an honest answer.
In our consultation, there's tenant support for simplifying the process, and there's support for the mandatory eviction in terms of making it easier to seek repossession for someone who's actually gone to court and been given a sentence. But I think where the balance is the right of appeal. And there's also a right of appeal in terms of converting a Scottish secure tenancy to a short secure tenancy. So in terms of human rights, there's a right of appeal. And if you ask, because I've checked the evidence sessions previously, and everyone's got, obviously the legal profession are very wary about a knee-jerk reaction and to changing the law to make things easier because of people's right to appeal. So our view would be, yes, there's tenant support for making things simpler, and there's also a right of appeal to support people who are in that situation. Where the sort of dilemma comes is if it's a mandatory eviction and there's no reasonableness test, they don't have to actually look at the detail to say is it reasonable or not to evict, but then the person's got a right of appeal. So there is a bit of a kind of juxtaposition there about how that would work out. But on the whole, I think there's support.
Leslie?
Yeah, we'd be supportive as well. And I think in terms of the reasonableness, I think it's where I said earlier about having clarity over what kind of conviction, and I think that will come out in the second part of the bill, but certainly very supportive of the proposals.
Subject to further clarification.
Yeah.
Ms MacLeod, if you...
No, sorry, I just happened to be looking at you.
I don't know whether to be
gazing in wonder,
to be flattered or concerned by that statement. Do you have a view on the?
She was making a mistake.
I agree with a lot of what's been said. That's about the best I can do for you there.
Right.
I can think of instances and all the rest of it, but the people would be able to identify themselves, and I'd be better just not to.
Thank you very much. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. We have mentioned the... So has anybody got any other questions on part 2 before I move on? No? Okay. Alex, we have already mentioned private rent sector tribunals, but I think you may...
A very short question I think needs to be asked here, and that is that we have seen this proposal for tribunals in the private rented sector. We've had somebody here spoke to us earlier in the day who was very keen on the idea of these tribunals being extended to the social rented sector. What do you think of that?
Yeah, fully supported. It should, cover disputes in the social rented sector, impact on social housing tenants, resolution of disputes. Again, long waiting periods before a dispute's heard, going through a judicial system. Sheriff doesn't want to know. It's his lunchtime. He's having a heart came with a murder case or something like that. It's not high priority. It should have been included in the bill. I have it on authority from the Minister of Housing and Welfare that it may well be included in the bill in later stages. Regional network representatives would like it included now. And for that part, I think it would be much preferential if we could have a team of housing experts, lay people, who would do this in the public sector.
I think we've got that message loud and clear.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Just one thing to add in, that there is, we came across the same level of support, but a lot of tenants didn't really know how this would work, what it would cost, what the implications are. So obviously I think because there's not been consultation on it in the social rented sector, that's really essential so that people are fully aware of what the cost and also the benefits.
I think, sorry, while there hasn't been consultation on it, I believe that in the consultation that did take place, both landlords and tenants came up with the suggestion that this would be a good idea.
Just to really support it, just to say that there was much disappointment in our consultation that it wasn't in there. So definitely very supportive of it.
I agree. This was the biggest disappointment to the bill for me, but I do agree that there should be consultation on how the actual housing panels will work, and I think that again it has to be very clear to tenants of what these housing panels will be made up of and how they will actually work.
There is some of that in the bill, but I'm sure it will be much more detailed in secretary legislation. But yeah. Are you finished, Alex? Anything else you'd like to say on the tribunals? No. Okay, we'll move on to part 4 of the bill then, which is letting agents. And Gordon, you've got some questions on that.
Thanks very much, Convener. Are you aware of any problems in your area arising from rogue letting agents? Do you support the proposed legislation? And what benefits do you think it will bring to tenants and the wider community if it's introduced?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm aware of problems in my local area. I live in Stirling, not far from here. I could relate a couple of letting agents who are somewhat circumspect in their operations, shall we say. This bill proposes to legislate so that there is a registration service of localised letting agents. It's a common belief, and misguided, I believe, that the legislation will allow letting agents to police themselves, for example. Where you have, say, 3 letting agents in a town or city, 2 who are registered and behaving impeccably, shall we say, and the one who isn't, the other 2 will make sure that the one who isn't comes into line. That's not going to happen. It must be clear and proper and full regulation, including compliance with all the legislative processes. And, may I say, in a monitoring sense, we need to observe how they are operating. Letting agents should have a set of professional standards, or a code of conduct for that matter. Legislation proposes this, but I think you have to look at the checks and balances of how that will operate.
Again, in our consultation, we were worried about enforcement and where the resources for enforcement would come from, what the enforcement regime would actually take the shape of. We were worried about resources from local government being used to chase private landlords, and we feel really that although this is a positive step forward, maybe it doesn't go quite far enough.
Strengthen it then?
Well, first of all, I would not only make it mandatory, I would make it actually written down in law, so they know exactly what they have to do, and so exactly what the standard is, exactly what I think. I would even go as far as to say that we should be controlling the rents of the private sector by making them a certain percentage above social rents within certain areas. I mean, in Glasgow, the quality of some of the private rented housing leaves a lot to be desired. We visited houses in Govan Hill and houses in the Gorbles in Govan that when we went for our consultation, and the way that some of these people are treated is absolutely ridiculous. It shouldn't be happening in a modern Scotland. I mean, waiting weeks and weeks for repairs to heating systems and having water switched off because they want them to move out and things like that. And I think that we really do have to stamp down on some of these letting agents, and it is going to be in the enforcement. I think that the actual, whether this works or not, will be in the enforcement of it.
All the previous points, and we wholeheartedly support something that's going to have a statutory code as a minimum standard. Obviously, that's still to be consulted on, so I think a lot of issues that Kevin raised there in terms of people's concern, it's great to have a code, but it has to be enforced. Who would be involved in that responsibility? So we would welcome a code, and I think it would be helpful to have more dialogue and debate with the tenant representatives and some of these advisory groups post the bill.
Okay.
One last question. Is there any other problems with, in terms of private letting, with the existing legislation, you know, whether it's the private landlord scheme or the deposit scheme or whatever, you know, are there any issues that you're aware of? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
I mean, illegal evictions, the number of illegal evictions that are taking place, and the lack of follow-up on these illegal evictions is quite worrying. With landlords in the private sector seem to think that they can just chuck people out when they want to, or when they want to put the rent up. And I think that it's a real negative aspect is that when people think that they're left with nowhere to go when these things happen, they don't get their deposit back, they don't get the security deposit back, and they're actually more or less forced to evict from the properties. And I think this is a problem in Glasgow, and I think that it's one of the things that we really have to look at, that bringing, you know, criminal charges against some landlords, actually taking them to court and putting them in prison for these illegal evictions and for some of the methods that they use against their tenants.
Yes, I'd like to say there's also an issue which I've come across in recent months and years, is that since the introduction of the deposits to third-party Act, which we welcomed, there have been suggestions that letting agencies have been charging for the production of a lease or tenancy agreement, for example. This is quite extraordinary, really outlandish behaviour, because the letting agents Let me say this, Convener. There are good landlords out there. They may well own only one property or they may own 100. They're going through a letting agency to doing the recruitment process. The letting agency is not bothering its backside other than to sign somebody up. Right? They're not interested in the repairs mechanism. They're not interested in whether or not the tenant is satisfactory with their home. All of that goes by the wayside. So this process that is proposed in the bill go a long way to reducing that problem, but it needs a little bit more.
Just to reiterate what Hugh said, most of the calls that we get, and we do get quite a lot from private tenants with regards to deposit, not being able to get their deposits back, and the challenge, particularly for students and younger people who are in vulnerable situations because of that, and also poor quality of repairs. So obviously anything at all with regards to the housing bill that can address having a higher standard of repair in the private sector would be welcomed by absolutely everyone.
Most of the codes that are in place at the minute for the private sector, and it's a huge part of our society, huge amount of people live in private sector properties, are voluntary. So anything that's going to come in to make it statutory and to have some teeth, I think is really important, would be welcomed by tenants across Scotland.
It is about teeth, and it is about supporting, but it's also about the quality of the product. I mean, it is a product. That the letting agent is the go-between between the landlord and the tenant, and it's also in the landlord's best interest for the letting agent to behave in a proper manner, and it's as much as it is for the tenants. And I think that teeth, if you can give the enforcement teeth, that is what really will make the difference.
Anybody else got any questions on letting agents? Okay. If we move finally on to the Scottish Housing Regulator, the Scottish Housing Regulator has powers to direct the transfer of RSL assets under the Housing Scotland Act 2010. However, before it does so, it must consult and have regard to the views of tenants and secured creditors that hold securities over houses of RSLs. Section 79 of the bill would create a narrow exception to the duty of the housing regulator to consult and have regard to the views of tenants and secured creditors that hold securities over houses of RSLs in cases where RSLs find themselves in financial jeopardy. So are you content that these proposals are proportionate and in the interests of tenants? Leslie, you're at the bit to answer that question.
I think to say it was unpopular would be an understatement. I think there was, what's the regulator doing if it gets to this stage where we have to transfer properties without any consultation? How long does it take? So absolutely no support at all. For this proposal. People were horrified by that.
Okay, where do you think it's come? You know, what in the consultation would the government have? Why would they have come up with this then? I'll let you think about that. Maybe Kevin's got an answer to that.
I think if I go back with my Housing Policy Advisory Group papers, there were a number of RSLs who were in deep doo-doo, shall we say, with their funders, and there was a panic reaction when they looked at it and said, well, actually, we may not be able to put these things in place with the new housing regulator who's no longer part of the government. I mean, it has always been the slippery slope to self-regulation when the Scottish Housing Regulator was made independent. We had worries about that. And this just seems to be another erosion of the tenants' powers over the Scottish Housing Regulator. I know that when this came to our Western Isles Forum Group, there was absolute horror at it, because when we agreed to transfer, one of the parts of the transfer agreement was that if anything ever happened that would create a problem with our RSL, then the council would step in and take back the housing properties. And that was also a thought for River Clyde Homes and people like that who also did stock transfer, and then suddenly they're coming and tramping all over transfer agreements. There was absolutely no support whatsoever for this power for the Scottish Housing Regulator without consultation.
Hugh?
I would concur totally, Convener. I would concur totally with the two views given thus far. It's totally abhorrent for this power to be enacted to remove the assets and social aspects of an RSL without consultation to its tenants. Convener, tenants are practically the stakeholders who have the prime importance. Each one is encouraged to become a bona fide shareholder, albeit by £1 membership fee or something like this. And with that gives them certain aspects to certain rights in consultation, rent rises and so on. And to remove this, albeit at a short stage, and realise what the legislation proposed is saying, that it will only be on an overnight situation. But let me say this to you. The regulation inspection regime is quite clear. It will be easily identifiable if an RSL is in viability problems. And with that, now that we've got the Charter, and we have to process the, I think we call it the ARCs, which is the report style, it would be easy to see at a glance if there were problems that needed further investigation. To say that this warrants an overnight removal is absolutely abhorrent. We would not support this.
Eileen and then Jennifer.
It's a good question. Why was it introduced without consultation? Because I'm sure it's not just tenants that have raised. I know that I've seen the CIH also identified it as an issue. It will be completely out of sync with what's currently happening. TIS and TPAS provide independent tenant advice on mergers and stock transfers and constitutional partnerships all over Scotland. So here's a scenario. At what point would the housing regulator make a decision that it was too late to consult? There's a real slippery slope there when it's a decision that's taken by the regulator. So what you currently have in Scotland is if an organisation is looking to merge with another organisation, currently they've got a right to ballot. But if there's obviously insolvency or there's issues or there's an inquiry being undertaken, they've still got a right to be informed and a right to be consulted. Now, at the best, you could say that that process might have to be a slightly quicker one. But tenants are due the right of an explanation about why the landlord situation is as it is, and also to look at the options. It will be tenants' rents that will pay for the decision and the valuation that's based years to come, not us and not yourself. So I can't understand why it will be completely out of sync and muddy the waters currently. So the issue is, at what point does a tenant then not have consultation? Does the line then say, because in Scotland just now it's so confusing with constitutional partnerships and mergers, at what point people have a right to be consulted and a right to have a ballot. And then you introduce this clause that says when you're facing insolvency. So I think that any tenants group, if we were advisors going to advise on that, they would say, well, why are we in a situation where it's so late in the day that we've been informed about there's something has gone wrong in the regulatory process? And there would be lots of warning signs before that. So I think that if you erode this right that tenants have, our concern would be, what does that say about rights that tenants have, given that the housing association sector all over Scotland just now is looking at its future and longer term future. I think that there has to be consistency. And the issue, maybe that's the regulator needs to address that about why that's there, is at what circumstance would that deemed to be appropriate? I don't think it is at all.
Jennifer?
I just really want to agree with what Eileen has said and say that it cannot just happen overnight that a housing association goes down the drain or everything goes downhill. The returns that have to go in to the regulator, they are bound to indicate that something is wrong if they're put in honestly. There must be guidance somewhere along the line where people can pick up that there's something wrong here and put in whatever help there is. And if it comes to the bit where it's the whole thing, you know, if it's got to be sort of dissolved, whatever, or passed on to another housing association, the tenants must be consulted. We as tenants have been given rights over the last 10 years, say, that we didn't dream of 20 years ago. And this is such a backward step. I'm appalled and I'm quite amazed by it, to be honest.
Kevin, do you want to come back in?
Maybe we need to look at this from a different angle, and maybe we need to think that maybe this is a failure of self-assessment. Maybe this is something that the Scottish Housing Regulator has seen within his inspection regime, and now it's all hands-off and desktop inspections. Maybe he sees a weakness there that it could be exploited. Cheap, exactly. Yeah. Well, this is what you get when you do a Scottish Housing Regulator to a budget. Instead of looking at what needs to be done.
I said, I think the housing regulator's a she.
She.
She, not
I think Michael Cameron is not a she.
All right.
The Scottish Housing Regulator, the last time I met him, which was
all right, okay.
last week,
okay.
I'm sure he was a he.
Maybe I've got it wrong then. Yeah, I thought it was, yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. Have any of my committee members got any more questions? Panel, is there anything that we haven't covered in our questioning that you wanted to raise? Just, yeah. Okay, quickly.
Yeah, just that the reasonable preference, I'm quite surprised that the change to the reasonable preferences weren't brought up by the committee. I'm wondering if maybe that you're feeling that there isn't any discussion that needs to be taking place there.
Not sure I'm with you on what you're talking about.
On
the allocations? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, the changes to the 87 Act, I mean, it will come into Muffers when sections, and that is Section 2 and more meat to put on the bones, but we are quite worried about some of these reasonable preferences and the man's put forward, because it's not just about current tenants, it's about future tenants, and it's about how future tenants will be affected by this bill. And I think I made the point earlier that in the consultation process, future tenants were sort of like left out in the dark a little bit in the consultation process.
Have you put that in your written evidence?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's fine. Well, we'll make sure that we look at that there then. Anything else? No. Okay, well, can I thank you all very much for your evidence today. It's been very, very helpful. We only had that one item on our agenda this evening, so at this point I'll close the formal meeting and we will then move into the informal question and answer session with members of the audience. But just for information, next week the committee will be hearing evidence on this bill from COSLA and ALACHA, which is the Association of Chief Housing Officers. And as well as that, we'll have an update on the progress of the building of the Queensferry crossing from the project team, and we'll consider a draft report on the proposed National Planning Framework 3. Before we move to the questions, I'd like to thank the Dumbartonshire Council staff for looking after us today, sustaining us with teas and coffees and food, and for making sure that we have a nice place to have the meeting in. I'd also like to thank the Parliament staff, because there's a huge amount of effort, as you can imagine, goes into taking the Parliament out of its normal buildings. So we've got the official report, broadcasting, the stewards, the press office, and indeed the clerks, who have had a huge amount of work in setting this up. So I'd like to thank them all, and I close the formal meeting.